Daniel was 42 years old. For 15 of those years, he had been married to Elena. He had built their life with the same quiet precision he brought to his work as a structural engineer, beam by beam, joint by joint, until it was a thing of substance, a shelter. When her kidneys failed, a cascade failure that threatened the entire structure, he did not hesitate. He was a match. He gave her one of his. For 8 months, he watched her grow stronger, her color returning, the light back in her eyes, while he recovered on a slower, more private timeline. Then, returning a day early from a site inspection in Cleveland, he found a stranger's car in his driveway and his wife's lover sleeping in their bed. What Daniel did next would not be loud, it would not be violent, but it would dismantle a life with the same methodical force he had once used to build it. Comment where you are watching from, and subscribe for more stories of quiet justice. The life Daniel had constructed was a study in reliable patterns. His days began before sunrise, with the low hum of the coffee maker and the soft blue light of his laptop. He was a partner at a mid-sized engineering firm, the one they sent when a project was complex, when the variables were numerous and the margin for error was non-existent. He found a certain peace in the mathematics of stress and load, in the immutable laws that governed whether something held or whether it broke. His colleagues respected his quiet competence. He arrived early, he stayed late, he did not seek recognition, he sought soundness. His satisfaction came from a blueprint perfectly executed, a structure that would outlast him. His relationship with Elena had been built on the same foundation. They met in college, she a vibrant art history major, he the focused engineering student who seemed to see the world in lines and forces. She brought color and spontaneity. He brought stability and a deep, unwavering calm. He loved the way she would describe a painting, the sweep of her hands, the passion in her voice for things he could not see but could appreciate through her. He built her a home, not just the physical house in a quiet, tree-lined suburb, but a life of security, of unspoken understanding. He managed the finances, the maintenance, the long-term plans. She managed the social calendar, the aesthetics, the vibrant energy that filled the spaces he built. It was a partnership, a balanced system. He thought it was sound. The diagnosis came on a Tuesday in April. Polycystic kidney disease, a genetic ghost that had haunted her family for generations but had until now left her untouched. The doctor's words were clinical, detached, but they landed with the force of a wrecking ball. Function at 20% and declining. Dialysis was an option, a bridge. A transplant was the solution. Elena, who had always been the kinetic force in their lives, seemed to shrink. The vibrancy leached from her, replaced by a gray, weary fear. Daniel felt the shift in the very structure of their world. A foundational element was failing, and the entire edifice was at risk. He did not allow himself to feel the panic. Panic was a useless variable. He moved into the mode he knew best. Problem, analysis, solution. He sat through the consultations, his face a mask of calm attention. He absorbed the terminology, the probabilities, the procedural steps. He took notes in a small black book, the same kind he used for site inspections. While Elena wept, he asked questions about blood types, antibodies, and donor criteria. The doctor spoke of a waiting list, a lottery of hope and despair that could stretch for years. Daniel saw the look in his wife's eyes at the mention of it, a quiet extinguishing of light. He saw the structure of her hope beginning to buckle. That night, sitting in the sterile quiet of their car in the hospital parking garage, the concrete pillars around them solid and unyielding, he made a decision. He did not announce it. He simply said, "I'll get tested." Elena turned to him, her face pale in the faint fluorescent glow. She started to protest, to speak of the risk, the enormity of it. He placed a hand on her arm, his grip steady. "We'll just see," he said. It was not a discussion. It was a statement of intent. The test came back. He was a match. A perfect one, the doctors said, with an air of clinical surprise. The odds were slim for a non-relative, but not impossible. For Daniel, it felt less like luck and more like logic. He was the supporting column. Of course, he would bear the load. The weeks leading up to the surgery were a blur of appointments and preparations. Daniel arranged for his leave from work, handing off his projects with detailed color-coded binders. He prepared the house for their recovery, installing grab bars in the bathroom, pre-making and freezing meals, setting up a small bell on Elena's nightstand. He operated with a logistical focus that left no room for fear. He was managing a complex project with two critical dependent variables, his health and hers. Elena, meanwhile, was a storm of conflicting emotions. She was grateful, terrified, guilty. She would watch him as he moved through the house, his expression unchanged, his movements economical, and she would begin to cry. "You don't have to do this, Dan," she would whisper. "We can wait." He would stop what he was doing, look at her, and his gaze would be clear, unwavering. "This is the solution," he would say. Not "I want to do this," not "I love you," but "This is the solution." For Daniel, that statement contained everything else. It was the engineer's declaration of love. The night before the surgery, they lay in the dark of their bedroom. The silence was heavy, filled with the unspoken enormity of what was to come. Elena's hand found his across the space between them. Her fingers were cold. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I know," he said. He did not say "me too." He felt a tremor of fear, a primal dread of the anesthesia, the knife, the violation, but his fear was an unproductive variable. He compartmentalized it. His role was to be the solid ground beneath her feet. The surgeons are the best, he said, his voice a low, steady anchor in the dark. The plan is sound. The surgery was a success. He woke up in a haze of pain and disorientation, a deep, searing ache in his left side. His first coherent thought was not for himself, it was for her. He croaked her name to a nurse, who smiled kindly. She's doing wonderfully, the nurse said. The kidney started working right away. A wave of relief washed over him, so profound it almost made him pass out. The project was a success. The load had been transferred. He had held. The recovery was asymmetrical. Elena's transformation was rapid, almost miraculous. Within weeks, the gray pallor was gone, replaced by a healthy flush. The exhaustion that had been her constant companion for a year vanished. She had energy. She's laughed again. A sound Daniel realized he had deeply missed. She started talking about the future, about trips they could take, about picking up her painting classes again. She was rebuilding. Daniel's recovery was slower, a more arduous climb. The deep ache in his side lingered for months. He was perpetually tired. The surgeons and his doctors assured him this was normal. Donating a kidney was a major physiological event. It could take a year or more to feel fully himself again. He accepted this with the same stoicism he accepted everything. It was a known variable, a calculated cost. He returned to work part-time, his energy flagging by early afternoon. He would come home and find Elena in the garden or just returning from a long walk, her face glowing with life. You should be resting, she would tell him, her brow furrowed with a concern that felt to him slightly performative. You did so much. He would nod, retreat to his study, and feel the profound weight of his fatigue. He did not resent her energy. It was, after all, what he had given her. It was the intended outcome, but a subtle distance began to grow, a gap he couldn't quite define. She was moving forward at a pace he could not match. Her social life, which had withered during her illness, bloomed again. Lunches with friends, gallery openings, charity events. She would invite him, but he was usually too tired. It's okay, she would say, kissing his forehead. You rest. You've earned it. He would watch her leave, a flash of bright color and expensive perfume, and the house would suddenly feel very large, very quiet. The project manager was now superfluous to the project's success. He told himself this was the goal. He told himself he was happy for her. But a hairline fracture of unease had begun to form in the foundation of his certainty. He noticed small things. She was more protective of her phone, angling it away from him when she texted. There were new friends he'd never met, names dropped into conversation without context. He attributed it to her new lease on life, her reconnecting with a world she had been forced to abandon. He was a man who believed in evidence, and there was no evidence of anything other than his own slow recovery and his wife's vibrant return to health. 8 months after the surgery, he had a mandatory 2-day site inspection in Cleveland. It was a complex retrofitting of a historic bridge, his specialty. He was still not back to his full strength, but the work was a welcome distraction, a return to the familiar comfort of physics and steel. He called Elena the first night from his hotel room. She sounded happy, a little breathless. She was at a fundraising dinner with a friend, she said. The connection was bad. The call was short. He hung up and looked out at the lights of the city, feeling a pang of loneliness that surprised him. The inspection finished early. The contractor was more organized than expected. The data was clean. By noon on the second day, Daniel was done. His flight wasn't until the next morning. He could have stayed, had a steak, read a book, but a sudden, powerful urge to be home overtook him. He wanted to sleep in his own bed, to wake up in the quiet of his own house. He managed to get a seat on a late afternoon flight. He didn't call Elena. He wanted to surprise her. He imagined her delight, the way her face would light up. He pictured a quiet evening, maybe watching a movie, a return to their simple shared rhythm. He landed at dusk, the sky a bruised purple and orange. He took a cab from the airport, the familiar route settling his mind. As the cab turned onto his street, he saw it. A car he didn't recognize was parked in his driveway. It was a late-model BMW, a metallic gray coupe, low and aggressive. It was parked at a slight angle, with a casual arrogance that felt alien to the quiet order of his neighborhood. A prickle of unease ran down his spine. He paid the cab driver and got out. His briefcase is in one hand, his overnight bag in the other. The air was cool, smelling of cut grass and impending rain. He walked up the stone path he had laid himself 10 years ago. The first sign of critical failure. The front door was unlocked. He never left it unlocked. Elena was meticulous about security. He pushed the door open. The house was quiet but not empty. There was a presence, a stillness that was occupied. The air was thick with a perfume he didn't recognize, sweet and cloying. A man's leather jacket was thrown over the back of a dining room chair. A pair of men's shoes, expensive loafers, lay on their sides by the stairs. Daniel stood motionless in the foyer. He did not call out his wife's name. He listened. The only sound was the low hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. A deep, instinctual calm settled over him, the kind he felt just before identifying a catastrophic structural flaw. He was no longer a husband. He was an inspector. He placed his briefcase and bag down silently on the floor. He began to move through the house. His movements were slow, deliberate. He noted the details with a cold, precise clarity. Two wine glasses on the kitchen counter, one with a smear of lipstick matching Elena's shade, a half-empty bottle of expensive Pinot Noir he had been saving for their anniversary. In the living room, a cashmere throw was crumpled on the floor, not folded on the arm of the sofa where it belonged. He moved to the base of the stairs, and then he heard it, a sound from the master bedroom, a low murmur of conversation, then a woman's soft laugh. It was Elena's laugh. But it was different. It was a lazy, intimate sound he had not heard in a very long time. He began to climb the stairs. His feet made no sound on the thick runner. The ache in his side, a dull, constant companion for 8 months, sharpened into a blade of ice. Each step was a measurement, a confirmation of a terrible truth. The door to their bedroom was slightly ajar. A sliver of warm, lamplit light cut across the dark hallway. He reached the landing and stopped, his heart a heavy, silent drum in his chest. He could see a portion of the room through the opening, a bare leg, tangled in their white duvet, a man's shirt, a pale blue Oxford, draped over the valet stand where his own suit should have been. He did not need to see more. The data was conclusive. But he was a man who completed his inspections. He placed his hand on the door and pushed it open. The man in his bed was lean and handsome, with the kind of curated, expensive ease that Daniel had always found faintly repellent. He had dark, artfully messy hair and the smooth, tanned skin of someone who spent time at a golf club, not a construction site. He was asleep. Elena was awake. She was propped up on one elbow, looking at the man, a soft, adoring expression on her face. It was an expression Daniel had not seen directed at him in years. She did not hear the door. She did not sense his presence. She traced a finger along the man's shoulder, her lips curved in a smile. Then, she seemed to feel a change in the air, a drop in temperature. Her smile faltered. She looked up, her eyes slowly tracking towards the doorway. And she saw him. Her face when she saw him was a study in sequential collapse. First, a flicker of confusion, as if her brain could not process the data of his presence. He was supposed to be in Cleveland. He was not a variable in this equation. Then, a wave of pure animal panic, her eyes widening, her mouth falling open. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving behind the waxy pallor he remembered from her illness. The healthy, vibrant life he had given her seemed to vanish in an instant. The man beside her stirred, woken by her sudden tension. He opened his eyes, blinked, and then followed her terrified gaze to the doorway. His reaction was different, not panic, but a flash of annoyance, of inconvenience, followed by a dawning, wary appraisal. He sat up, pulling the sheet with him, a practiced motion. He had been in this situation before. Daniel did not speak. He stood in the doorway, his face devoid of expression. He looked at the man, then at his wife. He looked at the tangled sheets of their bed, the bed where he had recovered from surgery, the bed where he had lain awake at night, listening to her breathe, grateful she was alive. He took in the scene with the dispassionate eye of an engineer assessing a collapsed structure, noting the points of failure, the sheared bolts, the compromised supports. The silence in the room stretched, becoming a physical pressure. It was Elena who broke it. "Dan," she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. "You're home." It was not a question. It was a statement of horrified fact. The man in the bed cleared his throat. "Look, man," he began, his voice a low, reasonable baritone. Daniel's gaze shifted to him, and for the first time, a flicker of something cold and hard entered his eyes. The man's voice trailed off. He seemed to understand that this was not a negotiation. Daniel's eyes returned to Elena. He saw the frantic calculations in her expression, the search for a narrative, an explanation that could somehow contain this disaster. He saw her preparing to speak, to justify, to plead. He did not give her the chance. He held her gaze for one long, silent moment. Then, he took a single deliberate step back, pulling the door until it clicked softly shut, closing them inside. He turned, walked down the stairs, picked up his briefcase and his bag, and left the house, locking the deadbolt behind him. He did not slam the door. He did not yell. He simply exited the structure. The inspection was complete. He drove. He had no destination. He simply put the car in gear and pulled away from the curb, his movements fluid and automatic. He did not look back at the house. He drove through the familiar suburban streets, past the manicured lawns and the houses with their lights glowing in the windows, each one a small, self-contained world of unknown integrity. He felt nothing. It was a strange, hollow sensation, a complete absence of the rage or grief he might have expected. It was the calm that follows a catastrophic event, the silence after the collapse. His mind was a blank slate, wiped clean of emotion. All that remained was the data, the gray BMW, the unlocked door, the man's shoes. The look on Elena's face. These were facts. They required no emotional interpretation. The ache in his side, however, was a persistent, physical reminder. It was a deep thrumming pain, a phantom limb where a part of him used to be. He had grown accustomed to it, but now it felt different, freighted with a new and terrible meaning. It was the physical manifestation of his miscalculation. He had believed he was reinforcing a structure, shoring it up against collapse. Instead, he had merely provided the materials for its demolition. He had given a part of himself to save a life that was no longer his. He drove for an hour, maybe two. The sky turned from bruised twilight to an inky, starless black. He found himself on an industrial road near the airport, a place of warehouses and chain-link fences, a landscape of pure function that he found strangely comforting. He pulled into the empty parking lot of a logistics depot and shut off the engine. The silence was absolute. He rested his forehead against the cool glass of the driver's side window and finally allowed a single controlled thought to form. What now? This was the point in any project where after the failure analysis, he would begin to formulate a new plan. He began his inventory. Fact, his wife had a lover. Fact, she had brought him into their home, into their bed. Fact, this was not a new development. The casual intimacy he had witnessed spoke of familiarity, of routine. This had been happening for some time. Fact, he had paid for this betrayal with a piece of his own body. This last fact was the one that carried the most weight. It was the load-bearing point of his new reality. He did not know who the man was. He did not know how long it had been going on. He did not know the extent of the deception. These were the unknown variables. He needed more data. He reached for his phone. His thumb hovered over Elena's contact, programmed as my wife. He considered calling her. He imagined the conversation, the tears, the excuses, the pleas for forgiveness. It would be a chaotic, emotional event designed to obscure the facts, to appeal to a history he no longer trusted. He deleted the contact. Then he scrolled down and called the one person he knew would answer, the one person whose support was as reliable and unadorned as a steel girder. His brother Leo. The phone rang twice. Daniel, what's wrong? Leo's voice was sharp, instantly alert. He knew Daniel would not call this late on this night without a reason. Daniel did not waste words. I need a place to stay for a few days. There was a pause, not of hesitation but of rapid processing. My couch is yours, Leo said. Where are you? I'm not sure. Near the airport. Send me your location. I'll come get you. Don't drive. Daniel looked down at his hands on the steering wheel. They were perfectly steady. I can drive, he said. Just give me the address. Leo gave him the address to his small apartment across town. The door's unlocked, he said. I'll leave a light on. Daniel hung up. He sat for another minute in the darkness. The only light, the faint glow of the dashboard. He had a place to go. He had a single point of stability in the wreckage. That was enough. That was the beginning of a new blueprint. He started the car and pulled out of the parking lot, his course now set. He would not be emotional. He would not be rash. He would be an engineer. He would be methodical. He would gather the facts, and then he would act. He arrived at Leo's apartment building just after midnight. It was a nondescript, three-story brick building, functional and without pretense. He found a parking spot and walked to the entrance, his briefcase in one hand, his overnight bag in the other. He felt like a man who had been evacuated from his own life. Leo lived on the second floor. The door was, as promised, unlocked. The apartment was small, tidy, and smelled faintly of oil paint and turpentine. Leo was an artist, a painter of stark, photorealistic cityscapes. His work was as precise and disciplined in its own way as Daniel's. Leo was sitting at his kitchen table, a bottle of whiskey and two glasses in front of him. He was a few years younger than Daniel, with the same steady eyes but a more restless energy. He stood up when Daniel walked in. He didn't ask what happened. He just looked at his brother's face, at the profound, unnatural calm in his eyes, and understood that something fundamental had broken. He took the overnight bag from Daniel's hand. Whiskey? He asked. Daniel nodded. Leo poured two glasses. Daniel sat down at the table, the hard wooden chair a grounding sensation. He took a sip of the whiskey. The burn was clean, sharp. I came home early, Daniel said, his voice flat. She wasn't alone. Leo did not react with shock. He just nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on his brother. He had never fully trusted Elena. He found her charm too practiced, her affection for his brother a little too performative. He had kept these thoughts to himself, respecting the structure Daniel had built. Now, the structure was down. I'm sorry, Danny said. The words were simple, unadorned. They were exactly what Daniel needed to hear, not pity, just a statement of fact. Daniel took another sip of whiskey. I need to understand the timeline, he said, more to himself than to Leo. I need to know when it started. Leo leaned forward. What do you need from me? Access, Daniel said. I need to look at our finances. The accounts are joint. I don't want to log in from my laptop. It might trigger a notification. Use my computer, Leo said immediately, gesturing to a desktop in the corner. It's a clean machine. For the next 2 hours, Daniel worked. He sat at Leo's desk, the glow of the monitor illuminating his focused, grim expression. He logged into their joint bank accounts, their credit cards, their investment portfolios. He began to build a spreadsheet. He worked backwards from the present day. He was no longer a husband betrayed. He was a forensic accountant searching for anomalies. He found them, small at first, then growing in frequency and cost. A charge for a hotel bar 2 months ago, on a night Elena had supposedly been at a book club. A dinner for two at a high-end restaurant downtown, on a day he had been working late. A series of Uber rides to an address in a fashionable part of the city he did not recognize. He cross-referenced the dates with his own calendar, his work logs, his travel schedules. A pattern emerged, cold and clear. The deception was extensive. He kept digging. The charges escalated. Flowers sent to an office that was not hers. A weekend spa retreat for two, booked 3 months after his surgery. A jewelry store purchase a week before he came home. The timeline was damning. The affair had not begun in the last few weeks. The anomalies started appearing 5 months ago. 3 months after his kidney was placed inside her body. 3 months after he had saved her life. He felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. The initial shock had been the discovery of the affair itself. This was different. This was the discovery of its architecture. This was premeditated, sustained deception, carried out while he was at his most vulnerable, while he was recovering from giving her the gift of life. He found the address from the Uber receipts on a map. It was a luxury apartment complex. He searched the name of the complex along with public records. He found him Marcus Thorne, a portfolio manager at a boutique investment firm. A man whose professional life, Daniel noted with a dark irony, was also based on managing risk and return. There was a photo of him from a business journal. It was the man from his bed. Daniel printed the bank statements. He printed the credit card bills, highlighting the suspicious charges. He printed the map with the address. He printed the photo of Marcus Thorne. He was building a file, a dossier of his own ruin. Leo stayed up with him, silently refilling his whiskey glass, watching his brother work with a quiet, terrible focus. Around 3 a.m., Daniel's phone buzzed. It was a text from Elena. "Dan, please, we need to talk. I can explain." He read the message, his face impassive. Then another. "Please don't do this. I'm so sorry. I love you." He did not reply. He set the phone face down on the desk. Explanations were irrelevant now. Apologies were insufficient. Love was a compromised variable. All that mattered was the data. And the data was clear. The structure was rotten from the inside out. It could not be repaired. It had to be demolished. The next morning, Daniel woke on Leo's couch at 6 a.m. For a moment, suspended in the disorienting space between sleep and waking. He forgot where he was. He expected to feel the familiar weight of his own mattress, to see the morning light filtering through his bedroom window. Then the memory of the previous night crashed down on him, a physical weight. The gray BMW, the man in his bed, the look on Elena's face. He sat up. The ache in his side was a dull, constant fire. He looked at the stack of papers on Leo's kitchen table, the evidence he had compiled. It looked like a project file. He got up, showered, and borrowed a shirt from Leo. It was a little tight in the shoulders. When he came out, Leo was making coffee. "What's the plan?" Leo asked, handing him a mug. "I need a lawyer," Daniel said. "A good one. Not a bomber. A surgeon." Leo nodded. He knew a few people. He made a call. An hour later, Daniel had an appointment for that afternoon with a woman named Catherine Albright. She was a partner at a family law firm known for its discretion and its meticulous, no-nonsense approach. Her specialty was complex, high-asset divorces. She did not, as a rule, take same-day appointments. Leo's connection had called in a significant favor. Before the appointment, Daniel made another call. He called his office and spoke to his partner, Ben. He kept his voice even, professional. He told Ben he had a family emergency and needed to take an indefinite leave of absence. Ben, a steady, unflappable man Daniel had known for 20 years, asked no questions. "Whatever you need, Dan," he said. "Your projects are covered. Just take care of things." Daniel hung up, a flicker of gratitude cutting through the cold fog. His professional life was a structure he had built on a foundation of trust and mutual respect. It was sound. It would hold. At 1 in the afternoon, he walked into the offices of Albright, Hayes and Finch. The firm occupied a floor in a downtown skyscraper with views of the lake. The atmosphere was one of quiet, expensive competence. Catherine Albright was a woman in her late 50s with sharp, intelligent eyes and an air of complete, unshakable composure. She listened without interruption as Daniel laid out the facts. He did not speak of betrayal or heartbreak. He spoke of timelines, assets, and evidence. He presented the file he had compiled, the bank statements, the credit card bills, the photo of Marcus Thorne. He laid them out on her large mahogany desk, one by one. Ms. Albright examined each document, her expression unchanging. She looked at the highlighted hotel charge. She looked at the date of the spa weekend. She looked at the photo of Marcus. When Daniel was finished, she leaned back in her chair. "Your wife has illness and your donation," she said, her voice calm and measured. "When was the surgery?" "8 months ago," Daniel said, "and the evidence suggests the affair began approximately 5 months ago." Albright steepled her fingers. "The optics of this are exceedingly poor for her." She paused. "In this state, adultery does not typically impact the division of marital assets in a significant way. However, there is a concept of economic fault, dissipation of marital assets. This," she gestured to the pile of receipts, "this qualifies. But more than that, the circumstances, the donation, a judge will not look kindly on this. A jury would be even less forgiving." Daniel nodded. He had already reached the same conclusion. "What do you want, Mr. Collins?" she asked, her gaze direct. "Do you want to punish her? Do you want to reconcile? What is the goal?" Daniel met her gaze. "The goal is a clean extraction," he said, using an engineering term. I want to sever the connection completely, efficiently, and permanently. I want to divide the assets in a way that is fair, but reflects the data. I want to be done. Ms. Albright gave a single decisive nod. She understood. Then we will file for divorce immediately, she said. We will serve her at the house. We will also file a motion for exclusive use of the marital home, given the circumstances. It is unlikely to be granted long term, but it will establish a clear boundary from the outset. We will begin the discovery process to determine the full extent of the dissipated assets. Mr. Thorne may need to be deposed. She looked at Daniel. This will be unpleasant. She will not react to this with the same quiet logic you have. There will be emotional appeals. There may be accusations. Are you prepared for that? I am, Daniel said. His voice was steady. He had already factored those variables into his calculations. They were noise. He was focused on the signal. He left Catherine Albright's office feeling a sense of grim purpose. The demolition had begun. Elena did not understand the silence. After Daniel had walked out, closing the door so softly, she had collapsed onto the bed, a storm of panic and adrenaline coursing through her. Marcus, now fully awake and uncomfortably aware of the situation's gravity, had tried to be calming. He's just in shock, Elena, he'd said, pulling on his trousers. He'll yell, he'll scream, then you'll talk. We'll figure it out. He addressed quickly, giving her a hurried, awkward kiss on the forehead, and left. Call me, he'd said, before disappearing down the stairs. Left alone in the silent house, Elena's panic had given way to a frantic, circular logic. Daniel was not a man who yelled or screamed. He was a man who shut down. His quietness had always been a source of both comfort and frustration for her. It was a sign of his steadiness, but also, she believed, a sign of his passivity. She had always been the one to drive the emotional energy in their relationship, to push for conversation, to resolve conflicts he would have preferred to let fade. She assumed this would be the same. He was hurt. He had retreated into his shell. She would have to coax him out. She sent the first texts, the desperate pleas to talk. When he didn't respond, her panic began to curdle into annoyance. It was childish, this silence. A grown man should be able to confront his feelings. She called him. It went straight to voicemail. She called again. Voicemail. She called his brother, Leo. Leo answered on the first ring. His voice was cold, unfamiliar. He doesn't want to talk to you, Elena. Leo, please, she'd begged. Just tell me where he is. I need to see him. No, Leo had said, and the line went dead. The finality of it chilled her. This was not the usual pattern. It was a coordinated, unified front. She spent the day pacing the house, a prisoner in the beautiful, sunlit space Daniel had built for them. Every object seemed to accuse her. The books on the shelves he had assembled, the photographs on the mantelpiece from their travels, the faint, lingering scent of his aftershave in the closet. The guilt was a physical thing, a crushing weight on her chest. But beneath the guilt, another feeling grew, indignation. She had made a mistake, a terrible mistake. But had he been blameless? His quietness had become a chasm between them after the surgery. He was always tired, always distant. He had retreated into himself, leaving her alone with her newfound explosive vitality. Marcus had seen her. He had seen the vibrant, alive woman she was becoming again, not the patient her husband still seemed to see. Marcus had been exciting, attentive. It had started as a flirtation, a harmless ego boost, and had spiraled into something else. She had not planned it. It had just happened. This was the narrative she was constructing, the one she would present to Daniel. It was a story of loneliness, of neglect, of a mistake born from a desperate need to feel alive again. It was a story designed to elicit sympathy, to shift a portion of the load. She was confident that once he heard it, once he moved past his initial, silent anger, he would understand. He was a logical man. He would see the cause and effect. He still loved her. He had given her a kidney. A love that profound did not simply vanish overnight. The next day, she was in the kitchen, drinking coffee and trying to work up the courage to drive to his office when the doorbell rang. She opened it to find a courier, a nondescript man with a clipboard. He handed her a thick legal envelope. She signed for it, her hand trembling slightly. She closed the door and tore it open. Inside was a petition for dissolution of marriage. Her name was next to the word respondent. Daniel's was next to petitioner. Attached to it was a motion for temporary exclusive use of the marital residence, citing adultery and extreme emotional distress. The legal language was cold, brutal, and absolute. It was not a plea to talk. It was not an opening for negotiation. It was a demolition order. She sank to the floor in the foyer, the papers scattered around her. The silence from Daniel was not passivity. It was not a retreat. It was the quiet, methodical work of an executioner. She had fundamentally misread the man she had been married to for 15 years. She had mistaken the foundation for the furniture. She had believed his quietness was a weakness she could manage. She had been wrong. It was a strength she could not possibly comprehend. The legal process unfolded with a terrible, quiet efficiency. Catherine Albright was, as promised, a surgeon. She filed motions, sent discovery requests, and communicated with Elena's hastily hired lawyer in curt, factual emails that left no room for emotional maneuvering. Elena's lawyer, a man more accustomed to messy, dramatic divorces, seemed perpetually off balance. He had advised her to fight, to countersue, to make it difficult. But every move they made was met with a calm, documented rebuttal from Albright's office. When Elena's lawyer tried to argue for a more favorable asset split based on her past and future medical needs, Albright's office produced the mountain of evidence detailing the dissipation of marital assets on Marcus Thorne. The spa weekend, the expensive dinners, the jewelry, it was all there, itemized in a spreadsheet, the total amount a stark, damning number. A preliminary hearing was set. Elena's lawyer advised her that to fight the economic fault claim would mean deposing Marcus, bringing the affair into the public record in excruciating detail. Marcus, when she called him in a panic, was suddenly distant. Elena, I can't get involved in this, he said, his voice strained. My career, my reputation, this is between you and your husband. He was detaching himself, she realized. The thrill of the affair was one thing. The cold, financial consequences of a divorce were another. He was a portfolio manager. He was cutting his losses. The motion for exclusive use of the home was not granted permanently, but the judge, after a brief review of the initial filings, granted Daniel temporary possession for 60 days to allow him to secure his belongings and establish new living arrangements in a stable environment. The phrasing was a clear judicial rebuke of Elena's behavior. The day Daniel came to the house with movers was gray and overcast. He had Leo with him. Elena was there, as she was required to be. She tried to speak to him, to intercept him in the hallway. Dan, can we just talk for 5 minutes? She pleaded, her voice raw. He stopped and looked at her. His face was not angry, it was not sad, it was neutral, it was the face of a stranger. There is nothing to talk about. Elena, he said, his voice quiet but absolute. Anything you need to communicate can go through your lawyer to Ms. Albright. He then stepped around her and continued directing the movers, his voice calm and clear as he pointed out the furniture that was his, the boxes from his study, the tools from the garage. He moved with a purpose that was terrifying to her. He was not destroying their life in a fit of rage. He was disassembling it, piece by piece, like a project that had been completed and was now being decommissioned. She watched as they carried out the solid oak desk he had worked at for a decade. She watched as they took the leather armchair where he used to read. She watched as they boxed up the contents of his workshop, the physical evidence of the thousand small ways he had maintained the world she had so carelessly broken. The house began to feel cavernous, empty. The soul of it was being packed into a truck. The final item the movers took was a small, framed architectural drawing from his study. It was a cross-section of a bridge, intricate and beautiful in its precision. As he walked out the door for the last time, he paused and looked back at her. For a fleeting moment, she saw a flicker of something in his eyes. It wasn't anger. It was a deep, profound weariness. The foundation was good, he said, his voice barely a whisper. You just put too much stress on it. Then he turned and left, closing the door behind him. The consequences did not arrive with noise. They settled. The divorce was finalized 6 months later. The settlement was clinically fair. The assets were divided, but the amount Elena had spent on the affair was deducted from her share. The house, their house, was sold. The proceeds were split. Elena found herself with a substantial sum of money, but no home, no anchor. She and Marcus tried to make it work. They rented a chic, modern apartment, the kind of place she had once dreamed of. But the reality of their relationship was a pale imitation of the stolen moments. Without the thrill of secrecy, without the backdrop of her stable life with Daniel, Marcus's charm seemed thin, his conversation shallow. They argued about money. They argued about the future. The man who had been her passionate escape became her tedious roommate. The life she had blown up for him had been the very thing that made him attractive. Without it, he was just a man with a nice car and a fear of commitment. She had not traded up. She had simply traded a solid, load-bearing structure for a decorative facade. Daniel moved into a small, two-bedroom apartment in a part of the city he had always liked, an older neighborhood with buildings and mature trees. The apartment was sparse, almost monastic. He furnished it with his old desk, his armchair, and a few pieces he bought new. They were simple, functional, and well-made. He did not hang many pictures. The walls were mostly bare. His brother Leo came over one Saturday to help him mount a new television. It's a little empty in here, Dan, Leo said, looking around. It's clean, Daniel replied. He found he preferred it this way. The lack of clutter of accumulated history was calming. It was a blank blueprint. He could build again, slowly, on his own terms. He returned to work. His focus was sharper than ever. He poured his energy into the complex problems of steel and concrete, of stress and tension. The laws of physics were predictable. They did not lie. They did not betray. He found a deep solace in their reliability. He worked late, not out of obligation, but because he enjoyed the quiet of the office after everyone else had gone home. He would stand at the large windows of his office, looking down at the grid of the city lights, a complex, interconnected system that, for the most part, held. His colleagues noted the change in him. The quietness was still there, but it was different. It was not the quiet of a man holding things in. It was the quiet of a man who had nothing left to hide. He had been hollowed out and then had begun, slowly, to refill the space with his own solid presence. One evening, months after the divorce was final, he was working late when he felt a familiar, dull ache in his left side. He leaned back in his chair and unconsciously placed a hand over the spot. The scar was a thin, pale line, a permanent part of his topography. For so long, it had been a source of a deep, burning sense of violation. It was the physical price of his betrayal. But tonight, as he sat in the silence of his office, the feeling was different. The ache was just an ache. The scar was just a scar. It was a reminder of a choice he had made, a risk he had taken. The choice had been to save a life. The risk had been that the life he saved would not include him. He had accepted the risk, even if he had not been conscious of it at the time. The structure had failed, but he had survived the collapse. He had lost a kidney, a wife, and a life he had spent 15 years building. But he had not lost himself. His foundation, he realized, was not the house or the marriage or even Elena. His foundation was his own quiet, methodical, and unbreakable integrity. He had acted in accordance with his own internal code. He had been a builder. He had been a protector. And when the structure he was protecting proved to be unsalvageable, he had overseen its demolition with the same quiet competence with which he had built it. He had not become cruel. He had not become vengeful. He had simply become done. A sense of peace, profound and quiet, settled over him. It was not happiness. It was not joy. It was something more fundamental. It was equilibrium. He had found his balance point again. He turned off his office light, took the elevator down to the empty parking garage, and drove home to his clean, quiet apartment. The life he was building now would be smaller, simpler, but it would be sound, and it would be his. If this story resonated with you, consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more content. We have another story we think you'll want to see next.